ago. I worked in the boarding house in Miles City till he came, said he had land, horses, a good name. I was fool enough to believe it. How long were you with him? 3 weeks. Married this morning. Ran just after. He stood, dusted his hands on his trousers, then offered her a hand. She flinched, but after a few seconds she took it. He pulled her up gently. Let's get you warm. He led her to his horse, helped her up slow like she might break, then climbed up behind her. The ride back was quiet. She leaned into him after a few miles, shoulders trembling the way a fence shakes in thunder. Cooper brought her to the cabin he built with his own hands, tucked behind the cottonwoods near the base of the hills. It was small, but clean. There was a fire already burning in the stove. She watched him take off his hat, hang it by the door, then move around the house with a calm that made her chest ache. He poured water into the basin and set it near the hearth. You can wash up. Take your time. She nodded, eyes on the floor as he walked out. Loretta washed the river mud from her arms and legs, then pulled on the clean cotton dress he left folded for her by the bed. It smelled like cedar and sun. She ran her fingers along the stitching, wondering why a man like him lived alone. When she stepped out again, he was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of pine. You hungry? He asked. I haven't eaten since dawn. He stood and opened the door for her. They shared biscuits, beans, and jerky in silence. She ate slow, like she was not sure if it would last. That night he gave her the bed and took the cot by the fire. I won't stay long, she said, standing in the doorway. Stay as long as you need. She hesitated. You are not afraid of what he might do if he finds me? Cooper met her eyes. I have handled worse men than him. Loretta looked at him then, really looked. He was in his early 30s, she guessed. Worn hands, scar on his jaw, that quiet steadiness in his eyes that made her feel safe. She had not felt that in years. She nodded once and stepped back inside. The next few days passed in soft routine. He let her rest, let her breathe. She helped with the cooking and swept the cabin floors. She fed the chickens out back and watched the hills turn green with the season. One morning, as she stood by the river washing linens, she asked without looking up, Why are you out here alone, Cooper? He was stacking firewood nearby. Was married once. She died. Fever took her and our boy, 10 years back. I am sorry, he nodded. It took a long time to stop being angry. She looked up. Are you still angry? No, just tired. There was something in his voice that made her step closer. I do not know what comes next for me, she said. But I do not want to go back to what was before. You will not. That night they sat on the porch. She handed him a cup of coffee, fingers brushing his. His hand lingered. I never thought I would feel safe again, she whispered. You are safe here, Loretta. She looked at him. Why are you helping me? He took a deep breath, set the cup aside. Because you were huddled in mud in a wedding dress, shaking like a leaf, and no one should have to run like that alone. You deserve better. Her throat tightened. The stars above them blinked slowly. I do not know how to be anything other than what I was. You are already more than that. She reached for his hand then, held it in both of hers. I feel like I can breathe with you. He turned his palm up, laced their fingers. I want you to stay, he said quietly. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this can be your home. She blinked away the sting in her eyes. You mean that? I have not meant anything more in years. She leaned into him, head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, held her close. It was not loud. It was not sudden, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Loretta believed in tomorrow. The hens were pecking near the shed when Loretta stepped out barefoot, warm dirt sifting between her toes. The hem of Cooper's spare dress brushed her calves, still a little long on her, but it moved like it belonged to her now. Morning light filtered through the cottonwoods in long, golden stripes, and somewhere beyond the trees, the river murmured low and steady. She found Cooper kneeling near the corral, checking a split rail. There was a bay gelding tied nearby, twitching his ears and watching Cooper like he knew him better than most men did. You always up before the sun? She asked, folding her arms across her chest. His voice came back without looking. Old habit, makes the day feel longer. You fixin' to go somewhere? No, just mending what needs it. She crouched beside him, watching his hands test the wood for give. "Did you build this yourself?" "I did. Took me the better part of 3 summers. Hauled every post from west of the ridge." She ran her fingers along the rail, the grains smoothed by time and weather. "I wouldn't know where to start." He stood and offered her a hand up. "You'd learn quick." She brushed her palms on her skirt. "Maybe." "I wasn't raised to build fences." Cooper led the gelding back toward the lean-to with a soft click of his tongue. Loretta followed. "I've been thinking," she said, glancing toward the hills, "about what I might do now." He nodded once, let her speak. "I want something that's mine. Something I can shape with my own hands. I never had that before." She picked up a length of rope coiled near the shed. "You think a woman could keep bees out here?" His brow lifted. "Bees?" There were hives behind the boarding house. I used to watch the keeper work them. Gentle, steady hands. "Said they only sting when they're scared." Cooper leaned against the post, arms crossed. "This land's got enough bloom for it. Wildflowers come in heavy by midsummer. You'd have to fence the hives from the mule deer." "I could do that, if I had help building the frames." He smiled, slow and quiet. "I reckon I know a man with tools." She looked at him, eyes squinting against the sun. "You don't think it's foolish?" "No, I think it's yours if you want it." Their eyes held a moment longer than they had the day before. Then she turned toward the field behind the cabin, already mapping where things might go. That afternoon, they rode out to the edge of the property. Cooper led, Loretta keeping pace beside him. The land stretched wide and open, rolling with spring grass and scattered rock. A hawk circled above them, and she tilted her head to follow its arc. "There's a spot up yonder," Cooper said, pointing toward a rise where a few aspens clung to the slope. "Good sun, protected from wind. You could start there." She pressed her hand to her chest as if to hold the idea steady inside her. "I'll need lumber, wire, nails." "I've got some in the barn. What we don't have, we'll get from town." She looked over at him. "You're just gonna help me like that?" "No questions. I already saw what he did to you. That told me enough. You don't owe me a story to earn your place here." Loretta drew her reins in and stopped. Her voice came low. "I never knew men like you existed." He turned his horse to face her. "I didn't think I had it in me to be one." "Not for a long time." The wind shifted, brushing her hair across her cheek. She didn't move to fix it. "Do you think," she began, then paused, "someone like me could be part of something good, something that lasts?" He let the question hang between them, then dismounted. She watched him walk to her side, take the reins from her fingers and loop them gently over the saddle horn. "I don't think it," he said. "I know it." She slid down, boots landing in the grass. They stood close, the hush of the prairie all around them. "No one's ever said that to me without wanting something in return," she whispered. "I don't want anything you don't choose to give." Her hand found his sleeve, light as breath. "I don't know how to start over. You already have." They walked back side by side, not speaking, the rhythm of their steps falling into quiet harmony. That night she stood in the doorway, watching him by the fire, his fingers moving over the handle of his knife, carving slow and steady. She stepped inside, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I mended this," she said, unfolding the wedding dress. "I don't want to keep it, but it felt wrong to just throw it away." He stood, brushing the wood shavings from his lap. "What will you do with it?" "I think I'll cut it down. Make something useful, curtains, maybe. I want to make this place mine in pieces." He took the fabric from her hands. "That's a good start." Their fingers touched again, and this time she didn't pull away. He looked down at her, eyes soft with something unspoken. "I'm not afraid here," she said. "Not anymore," he nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "You never have to be again." She stepped closer, breath warm against his collar. "I want to stay, Cooper." He reached up, brushed her hair behind her ear. "Then stay." She leaned into him, fitting there like she'd always belonged, and for the first time in her life she did. By early June, the wild roses had started to bloom along the fence line, pale and open-faced, their scent drifting soft through the air. Loretta stood knee-deep in the tall grass behind the cabin, sleeves rolled to her elbows, measuring out space with a length of twine and a flat stone she'd notched for counting. Cooper watched from the barn door, wiping his hands on a rag, one boot braced against the threshold. "You're figuring the spacing for hives?" he asked. She nodded. 7 feet between them. That's what the keeper in Miles City said worked best. "You remember all that just from watching?" "I remember what I care about." She moved with assurance now, her steps measured, eyes sharp. Each day since she'd come had laid another stone in her, something steady, something hers. Cooper stepped out into the light, crossed the yard with the slow ease of a man used to giving space but ready to close it when needed. "You'll need good lumber. I've got planks from an old wagon bed." Dry but sound, she glanced toward the barn. "I can help strip the nails." "You know your way around a hammer." "I know not to swing scared," he chuckled once. "That'll do." They worked side by side beneath the overhang behind the barn, pulling rusted nails and sorting what could be salvaged. Loretta's hands were raw by midday, but she didn't pause. When Cooper passed her a tin of salve, she took it without a word and rubbed it in slow, eyes on the boards. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked, not looking up. "Used to," he said. "Rode as far as Utah once. Thought I might stay, but something always pulled me back here." "What was it?" He ran the back of his knuckles along a knot in the wood. "The quiet, the way the land doesn't ask more than it gives." She set her hammer down. "I thought I'd end up in a city. Somewhere with streetcars and shop fronts, but I never belonged there. Too many people pretending they weren't lonely." He leaned on the bench, watching her. "And now," she didn't answer right away, "now I don't feel like I'm pretending." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the field. They stood together under the eaves, the scent of sawdust and honeysuckle between them. That evening, while Cooper ran the trapline along the ridge, Loretta worked inside. She scrubbed the window glass until the light came through clearer, then set a row of empty jars on the sill. She'd brought them from the boarding house when she left, packed them in a flour sack with her sewing shears and her mother's Bible, though the pages were brittle and most of the cover gone. She'd carried them because she couldn't carry much else. When Cooper returned, dusk had settled. He dropped a hair on the table and hung his coat without speaking. She stirred the stew. He nodded thanks. "I ran into a man riding north," he said, pulling off his boots. "Said there's been talk in town about a woman gone missing from a ranch west of here." Loretta stiffened. "Did he say a name?" "No, just that the husband was offering coin for anyone who brought her back." She watched the fire flicker through the stove grate. "If he comes here, he won't. You can't know that." "I can know what I'll do if he does." She turned, eyes locked on his. "And what is that?" "Whatever it takes." She crossed the room and stood in front of him, close enough to feel the heat from his skin. "I don't want you getting hurt on my account." "I'm not." He brushed a thumb along her temple, slow and deliberate. "You're not a burden, Loretta." She closed her eyes. "That's not what I've been told." Then they were wrong. His hand dropped, but the space between them didn't widen. She looked up. "I don't want to live afraid." "Then you won't." "Not here." She reached up, fingers resting lightly on his chest. "You mean that?" "I do." The room was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind had stilled. She stood on her toes and kissed him once, gently. It wasn't a question. It wasn't rushed. It was a choice. When she stepped back, her voice came steady. "I want to build my life here, with you." He took her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Then we'll build it. Together." And with that, the last walls around her heart gave way, not with a crash, but like thawed river ice, breaking quiet beneath the surface, making room for spring. By the 3rd week of June, the air had taken on that distinct summer weight, the kind that settled in the crooks of elbows and behind knees, making the days stretch long and slow. In the early hours, before the heat rose, Cooper hitched the wagon and they made the trip east to the trading post. Loretta rode beside him, bonnet in her lap, eyes fixed on the low hills that rolled out like folded blankets. She hadn't left the homestead since the day she'd arrived. Her stomach turned once as they crossed the shallow ford, but Cooper's hand on the reins stayed steady, and she held her breath until the water was behind them. "Won't be long," he said, eyes on the road. "Just enough time to get what we need." She nodded. "I'm all right." The post was little more than a clapboard building with a front porch that sagged in the middle and a rail for tying up. A man with a gray beard and a crooked back leaned against the doorframe, chewing tobacco and watching the dust rise as they came in. Cooper climbed down and tied the horses. Loretta hesitated before stepping out, then followed him in with her chin lifted. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of canned peaches, sacks of flour, bolts of faded calico, and a few battered tools. A boy no older than 15 sat behind the counter, sorting nails into a tin. Cooper nodded to the boy. "Looking for wire mesh course and a frame saw." The boy pointed toward the back wall. Loretta drifted toward a stack of seed packets near the window, fingers brushing over illustrations of squash, sunflowers, and sweet clover. "You planning to garden?" Cooper asked, joining her. "Not at first," she said. "But now, I think I'd like to grow something that doesn't just survive, it thrives." He said nothing, only watched her as she slipped a packet of clover into the crook of her arm. Back at the counter, the boy added up the items on a scrap of paper. Loretta placed the calico she'd chosen last deep blue with a scatter of tiny gold flecks. "Enough for a dress," she said, glancing up at Cooper. "A proper one." He reached into his coat for a folded bill. "Then let's have it." They rode back with the wagon bed full and the sun slanting behind them. Loretta sat sideways, one leg tucked beneath her, the clover packet resting in her palm. "I've been thinking about the ridge," she said. "Where the grass grows low and the wind doesn't hit so hard. For the hives, for the house," he turned toward her. "I want to build one of my own, not far from yours, close enough to see the lantern light, but mine all the same." Cooper nodded once. "You sure?" "I am. I want to know I can stand on my own 2 feet before I lean into someone else's." He didn't smile, but something softened behind his eyes. "All right," he said. "We'll start with the foundation come morning." That night, she sat at the table sewing the first seams of her new dress by lamplight. Cooper carved a handle for the new saw, the shavings falling in quiet rhythm to the floor. Without looking up, she spoke. "Did you love her?" He paused, the knife still in his hand. "I did," she nodded, stitching another line. "Were you afraid to love again?" "Not afraid," he said. "Just didn't believe I'd be given the chance." She folded the fabric in her lap. "And now, I believe in second chances." She set her needle down and looked at him fully. "I want to be someone you can build a life with. Not just someone you saved." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers. "You already are." The lantern flickered once as a breeze slipped in through the window gap. Outside, the crickets had begun their evening song. Loretta stood and crossed to the door, looking out across the darkened field. "I think I'd like to plant the clover near the riverbank," she said. "Where I came from." Cooper rose beside her. "Then we will." They stood there a long while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the fireflies rise. Nothing more needed saying. The land had accepted them. The stillness between them was no longer hollow, it was full, weighty with the shape of what they were growing, not just in the earth but in each other. The ridge soil was pale and stony, but Cooper knew how to read the land, and Loretta knew how to trust her hands. By late July, the foundation for her cabin was set. Stones hauled from the riverbed, squared and stacked, the corners braced with timber Cooper had milled himself. She'd marked each board, every notch and groove, learning the rhythm of the work until her arms ached and her palms bore the tale of it. They worked in the hush of morning and the long heat of the afternoon. Cooper never hovered, never corrected, only showed her what she asked to know and let her find her own way through the rest. She learned how to square a frame, how to set a post without bowing it, how to read the grain of wood to avoid splitting. She learned the difference between silence that isolates and silence that comforts. One evening, after setting the last joist, Loretta sat on the edge of what would be her doorway, feet dangling above the dry grass, and her apron streaked with sawdust. "I never thought I'd know what it felt like to build something with my name on it," she said. Cooper leaned against the frame, sleeves rolled, arms crossed. "You'll be sleeping under this roof before the frost comes." She tipped her head toward the horizon, where the sky burned low with the last of the sun. I've been thinking about what to do with the room at the back. You've got plans. I want to use it for making candles and salves. Maybe trade them in town. I know flowers and herbs, at least the ones that grow here. I could make something useful. You've got the mind for it. She turned to him. Would you help me gather beeswax? I know it's early yet, but when the hives are strong, I'll help you with whatever you ask. She looked at him for a long moment. You mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. The wind carried a breath of sage from the hill beyond, and they sat there a while without speaking, the kind of quiet that held no weight. A week later, she rode into town alone for the first time, wrapped in the new dress she'd stitched herself. Cooper had offered to go with her, but she'd shaken her head gently. I need to walk into that post on my own 2 feet. He'd nodded, but stood in the yard until she was out of sight. She returned with a basket of beeswax, a jar of dried mint, and a letter from one of the ranch hands who'd known her from before, words of apology, awkwardly written but honest. She didn't answer it. There was nothing to say. That life had ended the moment she stepped into the river and out again. Cooper met her at the gate, his expression unreadable until she held up the wax and said, "We've got what we need now." That night, she poured her first mold by firelight, the scent of lavender drifting up with the steam. Cooper watched her from across the table, his elbows resting on the wood he'd planed smooth himself months earlier. "I'd like to trade these candles," she said. "I want to earn my keep, not just here, anywhere I am." "You already do," she shook her head, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. "No. I need to know I can stand on my own, even if I never have to anymore." He reached across the table, palm open. "Then let's build it all together, not just the walls, a whole life." She placed her hand in his, the warmth of it anchoring her in place. "I want that. I want all of it." By late August, her cabin stood finished. Modest, with wide windows and a slanted roof, the wood still pale from the saw. The wild clover she'd planted near the door had taken root, delicate blooms brushing against the stone step. Cooper had carved her a sign that hung near the threshold, "Loretta's Light." She didn't ask him to, but he'd done it anyway. They celebrated the first night inside with a stew she'd made and preserves he'd brought from his pantry. They ate on the floor, her dress hem brushing his knee, the candlelight throwing soft shadows along the walls she'd raised with her own hands. "I want to marry you," Cooper said, voice low but sure. She stilled, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Not because I saved you, not because you need it, but because I love you, and I want the rest of my days tied to yours." She set the bowl down and moved closer, her hand on his chest. "I would marry you 100 times if I could. But once will do." They wed under the cottonwoods where he'd first found her, the same trees now heavy with late summer leaves. The local preacher came up from town, and a few neighbors stood witness, quiet folk who shook Loretta's hand and offered small smiles that meant more than words. She wore a new dress, one she'd dyed herself with walnut husk and stitched with careful hands. Cooper wore the same shirt he'd worn the day they first met, sleeves pressed, collar straight.